Sinister Stories presents Seeing the Unseen, my journey with hyperactive pareidolia. Sometimes, the scariest things are the ones only you can see. As a kid, I was scared of everything. At night, I saw faces shifting in the wallpaper, branches wriggling like snakes, and piles of clothes that looked like slumped over bodies. Lamps turned into heads, and the fronts of cars grinned at me with eerie intent. I didn't just see things, I heard them too. Creaking doors sounded like moans, the wind screamed, and the floorboards sighed heavily. To me, it felt like ghouls, ghosts, and monsters were hiding in every shadow. I was an anxious kid, and it took years to understand why. Turns out, my fears weren't just an overactive imagination. I have a condition called chronic overactive pareidolia. You know how some people see faces in clouds or animal shapes in trees? That's pareidolia, a survival instinct we developed to spot hidden dangers. But for me, it's like that dial is turned up to 16. I don't just occasionally see things. I see them everywhere, all the time. There were treatments, of course. By the time I was 12, I'd tried 6 different medications over 4 years, but the side effects were awful. Some made me irritable, others made me hyper-focused, and one knocked me out completely. By 18, I was convinced I'd never hold down a job. School was barely manageable, and college seemed impossible. The meds I was on helped me function, but they gave me weird tics. My leg would jerk in my sleep, or I'd randomly drop things. I was a wreck. My mom even put grip tape on the stairs so I wouldn't trip. A few years ago, I was regularly meeting with the County Employment Services office, trying to find work, but I hated it. One Thursday, my mom drove me because the meds were really messing with me that day. I stumbled out of the car, nearly walked into a wall, and knocked over a trash can. I was a mess, but for the first time in years, I had an interview. The woman I met with was Teresa. She was older, with a warm coat, and she seemed like any other job coordinator at first. But then she offered me something unusual, a trial job with a one-time payment. The catch? I had to stop taking my meds. Still smelling like the trash I'd fallen into, I agreed. My first day off meds was a nightmare. I hadn't slept in days and my fears came rushing back. I was seeing faces everywhere, in the walls, shadows, and leaves. I heard whispers in the wind and screams in the creaking floorboards. Teresa picked me up in a gray sedan, barely speaking the whole ride. She was fidgety, biting her lip and tapping the steering wheel. We arrived at a remote yard with trailers and a rundown house. Armed guards patrolled the area, and a command tent was set up with laptops, antennas, and crates under blue tarps. Medics stood by, and everyone seemed on edge. As soon as I got out of the car, a team swarmed me, fitting me with a headset, gloves, and a heart monitor. Teresa watched, wiping sweat from her forehead. "What are we looking at?" she asked. Someone replied through my headset. "We got it early. Spot on sight. Any blues?" They said no, and then Teresa turned to me. "All I want you to do is go inside and tell me what you see," she said. "Why? What's in there?" I asked. "We don't know, but we think you can see it." After signing a waiver and giving a blood sample, I was handed safety goggles, only to have them taken back. "You need to see clearly," Teresa explained. My legs were shaking as I approached the house. Her voice came through the headset. "I'm with you all the way. Just tell me what you see." I stepped into the old house, its rooms dimly lit by spotlights shining through broken windows. At first, everything seemed normal. An old couch, a TV, some clothes draped over a chair. But then Teresa's voice grew impatient. "Tell me what you really see." In the bathroom, things took a turn. I felt sick, like something was watching me. In the mirror, I saw them, blue eyes staring back at me. I screamed, slamming the door shut, tripping over the shower curtain in my panic. "What did you see?" Teresa demanded. "Blue eyes," I whispered. It had blue eyes. They coaxed me out of the bathroom, but the hallway felt different. That's when I noticed a painting I hadn't seen before. 2 women walking across a bridge on a summer day. As I stared at it, the image blurred, and in the water under the bridge, I saw them again. The same blue eyes, hidden in the rippling colors. I knew then that it wasn't just in my head. Something was in that painting, watching me. "There's something in the painting," I reported. "In the living room." "Are you sure?" Teresa asked. "Absolutely." "Then get out." Once outside, armed men rushed in while medics checked me over. Lying there, I cried with relief as Teresa sat beside me. "You did good," she said. "You're done." That was my first job with Teresa, but not the last. Over the next few years, I worked with her team on strange assignments, spotting things others couldn't see, things they called blues. These were anomalies, like blue-colored objects or flowers, that signaled something dangerous. Once, they found teeth growing out of a wall. If I saw blues, the whole operation was shut down, and they'd destroy the area, sometimes with explosives, sometimes with fire. I'll never forget the sight of 6 men burning down a greenhouse before Christmas, flames twisting into shapes only I could see. I worked 33 cases over 2.5 years. Each time, I'd enter a location, spot the unseen, and leave. Most of the time, it was simple, just shadows, faces, or strange objects. But once I saw something as more terrifying. One evening, we arrived at a house that felt wrong from the moment I stepped in. The walls whispered, shadows moved, and outside, the guards' faces warped into monstrous shapes with glowing blue eyes. I ran, bolting through the woods, branches grabbing at me like hands. When I finally collapsed, gasping for air, I knew I'd escaped something far worse than I'd ever imagined. Since that night, Teresa and Hatchet Biotechnica had vanished. I'm still alive though, and if you're reading this, trust your instincts, because sometimes what you see might just save your life. After I ran from that house and collapsed in the woods, my life changed. It wasn't just about the strange things I had seen during my work with Teresa and Hatchet Biotechnique. It was the realization that I was on my own now. They had disappeared without a trace. No more calls, no more assignments, and no more check-ins. It was as if they had never existed, but I knew better. I had seen too much to believe that they were just some forgotten chapter of my life. For a while, I kept expecting to hear from them again. I thought maybe Teresa would show up at my door with another cryptic job offer, or that the company would call with a new mission, but the months passed in silence. Part of me was relieved. My life had been consumed by fear and uncertainty for years, and it felt like I could finally breathe again. But there was another part of me that couldn't forget. Even after they vanished, I couldn't shake the things I had witnessed. Those eerie blues I had been trained to spot, the anomalies hidden in everyday objects or landscapes, stayed with me. I could still see them sometimes. It wasn't as intense as when I was actively working for Hatchet, but every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. Maybe it was just my condition, my overactive pareidolia. Maybe it was my brain playing tricks on me, like it always had. But there was a deeper fear that lingered. What if those things I had seen weren't just figments of my imagination? What if they were real? And worse, what if they were still out there? I began to dig deeper, trying to find out more about Hatchet Biotechnica. It wasn't easy. The company had kept a low profile, and the few records I could find didn't give much away. They were officially listed as a subsidiary of Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. But beyond that, there was little information. No public records of their operations, no names of employees, nothing. It was as if the entire organization had been wiped clean. Still, I couldn't let it go. I needed answers, not just for my own sanity, but to understand what I had been part of for those 2.5 years. What had I really been seeing? And why had they chosen me to do this kind of work? I started reaching out to some of the people I had met during my time with Teresa. There weren't many. Most of the team members had been nameless, faceless figures, just doing their jobs. But I remembered one medic who had been particularly kind to me after a rough assignment. His name was Tom, and I managed to track him down online. When I finally got in touch with him, Tom was reluctant to talk at first. He seemed nervous, like he was afraid someone was listening. But after some convincing, he agreed to meet me in person. We met at a small cafe far outside of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Tom was older now, with deep lines on his face and a weary look in his eyes. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Whatever you're looking for," he said quietly, "it's better if you stop. Hatchet doesn't exist anymore, at least not in the way you think." I pressed him for more information, but he kept his answers vague. All he would say was that the company had been involved in something much bigger than I could understand, and that it wasn't safe to dig any deeper. "They're gone, and you should be grateful for that," he said. "You have no idea how close you came to something bad." I didn't know what he meant, but the fear in his voice was enough to give me pause. Still, I couldn't let it go. I needed to know what had really happened during those years I worked with them. I needed to know why I had been able to see things that others couldn't. "What were the blues?" I asked. "What was I really looking for?" Tom hesitated. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not of this world," he said. "The blues, they're not just anomalies, they're infiltrators. They blend into our reality, hiding in plain sight. And the people you worked for, Hatchet, they were trying to find them before they could spread." His words sent a chill down my spine. I had always suspected there was something more to what I was seeing, but hearing it confirmed like this was terrifying. "So what happened to Hatchet?" I asked. "Why did they disappear?" Tom shook his head. "They got too close. They found something they weren't supposed to, and when they did, they were erased. It's like they never existed." Left the cafe that day feeling more unsettled than ever. The things Tom had said echoed in my mind. Infiltrators, blending into our world. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory, but deep down, I knew there was truth to it. I had seen the blues myself, those strange blue-colored anomalies, and I had felt their presence. There was something off about them, something unnatural. After my conversation with Tom, I tried to go back to my normal life, but it was impossible. Everywhere I went, I kept looking for the blues, scanning my surroundings for any sign of those hidden intruders. Sometimes I thought I saw them, just for a moment. A flash of blue in the corner of my eye, or a strange shadow that didn't quite belong. It wasn't just the visual hallucinations that haunted me. It was the feeling that something was watching me. I began to notice subtle changes in my environment. Things that seemed out of place, like a chair that had moved slightly, or a door that was left ajar when I was sure I had closed it. It could have been my mind playing tricks on me, but after everything I had been through, I couldn't be certain. One night, I woke up to the sound of faint whispers in my apartment. At first, I thought it was just the wind or my neighbors talking, but the voices grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, like something was trying to communicate with me. Terrified, I searched every corner of my apartment, but there was nothing there, at least nothing I could see. Yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, and I knew then that whatever Hatchet Biotechnica had been hunting, it wasn't gone. It was still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting, out of my apartment. Hoping that a change of scenery might help me escape the feeling of being watched, I found a small place on the outskirts of town, far away from anyone who might know about my past. It was quiet, isolated, and for a while, I started to feel like I could leave everything behind. But no matter where I went, the memories of my time with Hatchet Biotechnica followed me. The things I had seen during those years, things that no one else could understand, still haunted me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a whisper, and every flicker of light looked like a pair of blue eyes staring back at me. I tried to convince myself it was just my condition acting up again, that my overactive pareidolia was making me see things that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom bathed in a soft blue light. At first, I thought it was just the moon filtering through the curtains, but when I looked closer, I realized the light was coming from inside the room. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it seemed to pulse and shift, as if something was trying to make itself known. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I scanned the room for the source of the light, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway. It was just a shadow at first, barely more than a blur, but as I stared at it, I decided to move out of my apartment, hoping that a change of scenery might help me escape the feeling of being watched. I found a small place on the outskirts of town, far away from anyone who might know about my past. It was quiet, isolated, and for a while, I started to feel like I could leave everything behind. But no matter where I went, the memories of my time with Hatchet Biotechnica followed me. The things I had seen during those years, things that no one else could understand, still haunted me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a whisper, and every flicker of light looked like a pair of blue eyes staring back at me. I tried to convince myself it was just my condition acting up again, that my overactive pareidolia was making me see things that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom bathed in a soft blue light. At first, I thought it was just the moon filtering through the curtains, but when I looked closer, I realized the light was coming from inside the room. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it seemed to pulse and shift, as if something was trying to make itself known. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I scanned the room for the source of the light, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway. It was just a shadow at first, barely more than a blur, but as I stared at it, the shape became clearer. Its eyes were glowing blue, and its form seemed to shift and ripple, like it was made of smoke or water. I froze, unable to move or speak, as the figure stood there, watching me. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at each other. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving me in total darkness. I sat there for hours, too scared to move, my mind racing with possibilities. Had I just imagined the whole thing? Or had one of the blues finally found me? After that night, I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I packed up my things and left the next day, driving aimlessly until I ended up in a small motel a few towns over. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do next. I just knew I had to keep moving. The fear of being found, of being watched, was too much to bear. I spent the next few weeks jumping from one motel to another, never staying in the same place for more than a couple of nights. I tried to keep a low profile, avoiding people as much as possible, but no matter where I went, the feeling of being followed persisted. I'd catch glimpses of blue out of the corner of my eye, or see shadows shifting in ways they shouldn't. I began to doubt my own sanity. Was this just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was something really after me? It was during one of these restless nights, as I lay in a dingy motel bed, that I decided to stop running. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if today would be the day they finally caught up with me. If the blues, or whatever they were, wanted to find me, they already had. Running wouldn't save me. Instead, I decided to go back to the beginning, to where it had all started. I needed answers, and the only place I might find them was with Hatchet Biotechnica. Even though Tom had warned me to stop digging, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something I hadn't yet uncovered. And if I was ever going to put an end to this nightmare, I had to know the truth. I returned to the county where I had first met Teresa and started asking questions. It wasn't easy. Hatchet Biotechnica had erased all traces of their operations, and no one seemed to know anything about them. But after days of searching, I finally caught a break. A former employee, who had worked on the periphery of their projects, agreed to meet with me. He seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder as we sat down in a quiet diner on the edge of town. He didn't know much about the specifics of Hatchet's work, but what he did know confirmed my worst fears. They were dealing with things we shouldn't have been messing with, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Things that weren't from this world. I don't know exactly what they were, but I heard rumors about anomalies, about people disappearing, about entire buildings being wiped out. I pressed him for more information, but he seemed reluctant to say anything else. Look, all I know is that the blues, they're not just anomalies, they're entities, and once they know you can see them, they don't stop until they get to you. That was all I needed to hear. I knew then that I wasn't just dealing with hallucinations or tricks of the mind. The blues were real, and they were dangerous. And if what the former employee said was true, I had been marked the moment I had seen them. Leaving the diner, I felt a renewed sense of urgency. I needed to figure out what the blues were, why Hatchet had been so desperate to contain them, and how I could protect myself from them. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late, that no matter what I did, they would find me. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't run from the truth any longer. Whatever was out there, whatever the blues really were, I had to confront it head on. The next few weeks were a blur of research and paranoia. I holed up in another small town, far from where anyone might recognize me, and pored over every scrap of information I could find about Hatchet Biotechnica and their mysterious projects. Most of it was dead ends, old reports that led nowhere, classified documents that I couldn't access. But occasionally, I would find a piece of the puzzle, an obscure mention of blue anomalies in a government report, or a vague reference to unidentified entities in a news article about unexplained disappearances. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear that Hatchet Biotechnica hadn't just been working in isolation. They were part of something bigger, a network of organizations, both private and governmental, that had been tracking and studying these anomalies for years. The blues weren't just a local phenomenon. They were global, appearing in different forms all over the world. And wherever they showed up, chaos followed. People went missing, entire areas were quarantined, and sometimes whole communities were wiped off the map. But despite all the information I found, there was still one question that remained unanswered. Why me? Why had Hatchet chosen me to be part of their operation? Was it because of my condition, my chronic overactive pareidolia? Had they known that I would be able to see the blues when no one else could? It seemed like the only logical explanation, but it didn't make the situation any less terrifying. If anything, it made it worse. Because if Hatchet had known about my abilities, then so did the blues. They had been watching me from the very beginning, and now that Hatchet was gone, there was no one left to protect me. One evening, we arrived at a house that felt wrong from the moment I stepped in. The walls whispered, shadows moved, and outside, the guards' faces warped into monstrous shapes with glowing blue eyes. I ran, bolting through the woods, branches grabbing at me like hands. When I finally collapsed, gasping for air, I knew I'd escaped something far worse than I'd ever imagined. Since that night, Teresa and Hatchet Biotechnica have vanished. I'm still alive though, and if you're reading this, trust your instincts, because sometimes what you see might just save your life.